Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. And now, here's Aaron Harber.
Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest today is the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend, thank you so much.
To you, sir.
It's a pleasure having you. It's an honor having you on the program, and I appreciate, I know several years ago you joined the show briefly when you were at the Democratic Convention in Denver.
Good to share with you again.
Well, that's absolutely. But, you know, what brought back memories when I was growing up was when I was a wee child, my parents had me marching with you and Dr. King for civil rights in Chicago.
It's amazing. We look back over 50 years, our country's made so much progress in a social sense. Relations in many ways have gotten better, but there's a violent undercurrent driven by fear and hatred and violence and racism. 1963, we talk about the March on Washington and Dr. King's dream. The first part of that speech was not about the dream, it was about the broken promise. 246 years of legal slavery. Another 100 years of legal Jim Crow. He said, but Mr. Lincoln, in your majestic shadows we stand. The Emancipation Proclamation you promised. Congress, the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments you promised. And yet today, we have a bounce check, the promissory note, bounce check marked insufficient funds. I refuse to believe that you can honor your promise. I dream of a day you'll honor the broken promise. And we tend to focus so much more on the dream, almost romanticizing the dream, and missing the broken promise of equal access and equal opportunity and even playing field. And the day of that speech, the reason the tension was so high, that was a very tumultuous year. There were the freedom riots across the South and the buses were burned. I was jailed June 5th that year in Greensboro because we refused to stop our sit-ins trying to use public facilities.
Weren't you a student then?
I was a student that day.
In Greensboro?
Indeed. And then June 12th, Medgar Evers was assassinated. Then the march on Detroit that same season, marching for jobs, and then his speech in Washington. And the day he gave that speech, from Texas across to Florida up to Maryland, we couldn't use a single public toilet. That day, black soldiers had to sit behind Nazi prisoners of war on American military bases with the flag flying high. Our money was counterfeited. We could not buy ice cream at Howard Johnson's. We could not run a room at Holiday Inn. We couldn't take pictures from the lawn of state capitals in our own country on that day. I dream of a day when we'll overcome those obstacles, that one day my children will be able to go to this theme park and not be judged by their color, but by their character, by their person. That was the context of that dream speech. And as the nation surged upward toward the dream of the America of promise, by 1964, we got the Public Accommodations Bill. So we no longer had to go upstairs in the back of the theater on the weekend. We could then use hotels and motels and parks and libraries. We had to go a step further. We had to get the right to vote. And it was really, after many years of struggle, finally it was brought to a head on Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama. And it was so embarrassing to the whole country and the whole world. Until finally, August 6th of '65, we got the right to vote. But we didn't realize that you didn't have the right to vote, but without understanding the nuances of gerrymandering, how they draw lines, annexation, at large, roll purging schemes. You can vote, but you can't win. It took us 25 years to get reasonable representation, even though we had the right to vote, 25 years later. And as we evolved in our consciousness, open housing in Chicago, for example, we had open housing marches, which you were part of really as a youngster. We could not live west of Ashton Avenue because of the use of schemes by real estate brokers, race brokering in real estate and redlining and the use of the zip code. And so we found we had to make that illegal. But Dr. King said, if you have public accommodations and the right to vote and open housing, what does it matter? People are too poor to function. So on the year before he was killed, and being a group of us in Atlanta, Georgia, in the basement of his church to organize a poor people's campaign, He said the war on poverty has lost the war in Vietnam. Bombs dropped in Vietnam will explode in our cities because of neglect. And I want to pull together Native Americans and Latinos and whites and blacks and Jews and labor and fight for a floor beneath which no person will fall in a country so blessed as ours, a job and income for every American. It was in that context we went to Memphis, fighting for the sanitation workers to have those who work very hard on the very high, dangerous jobs be able one day to see their children graduate from college like other people do. They have a right to dream. And there he was killed. But his dream of 63 was about public accommodations, the bare minimum of overcoming barbarism, where you can use a toilet, use a library. The dream of 65 was about the right to vote. The dream of 66 was about open housing. The dream of 66 was to end the war in Vietnam, revive the war on poverty. The dream of 67 was a poor people's campaign, that we might have adequate health care and nutrition for every American. So the dream kept expanding. And his last speech would have been, because we'd organize a resurrection city right between Lincoln's Memorial and Lincoln and Washington Memorial. We brought in tents and built a tent city to symbolize people being locked out. And that last speech would have been his determination to fight for us to shift our budget priorities so as to wipe out malnutrition, so as to build affordable housing and health care for every American. That speech he was not able to give, and that is today's unfinished business.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Coming up next.
I went to jail first, July 16, 1960, trying to use a public library in Greenville, South Carolina.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. The purpose of my program is to engender discussion in a format which promotes civil discourse. That is why you don't see a lot of shouting on the program or any chair throwing. My approach is to give guests a chance to tell you their opinions and explain the basis for those opinions. I believe guests reveal themselves when given a chance to fully speak their minds, as opposed to being limited to a few minutes or even just several seconds, as is often the case today on television. To make certain everyone feels welcome, I always try to make certain the programs are nonpartisan. That is why you see both Democrats and Republicans on the show, as well as people who are not affiliated with either major party. And by being nonpartisan, I'm able to bring guests to you from a broad spectrum of leadership across America and the world. Please feel free to tell me about the job you think I am doing and how we could improve the show. All you have to do is send an email to aaron@harbertv.com.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com. Now back to the Aaron Harber Show.
Welcome back to the program. I'm with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Again, honored to have you, Reverend, founder of the Rainbow Push Coalition, of course, first national rainbow effort and the Push effort that was merged. Senator for statehood for Washington, D.C. I'd love to talk a little bit about. In fact, let's talk about that right now. Why isn't Washington, D.C. a state?
It is the worst of democratic politics that you disenfranchise the citizens of our capital and will not give them a federal vote or a seat in the Congress, House, or Senate. Every industrialized country in the world has empowered and franchised its capital city. People in London or people in Moscow and Havana, the citizens of the capital have their federal place in the Congress, and we do not, and it is a source of shame. The citizens of D.C. pay more taxes than 9 states. Their per capita of youth serving in war is more than 25%. And yet somehow, because of fear that they may vote Party A or Party B, democracy does not promise who will win, it promises who will participate, which is everybody. And the citizens of our capital do not have the right, so it's taxation without representation, which we call tyranny.
Now, the district's represented in Congress, but that representation is...
Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, she works, but she does not have a vote. D.C. does not have a voice in its Congress, so that the Congress can arbitrarily, unilaterally impose its will upon the people who live there. So, for example, the people there voted to have less guns. The Congress voted you must have more guns, and then complained about violence, for example. People there who run our government, the infrastructure of it, have been radically deprived of that right to vote. And so it's a part of America's unfinished business. How we fight wars for democracy and declare people should have the right of self-determination, open, free, fair, transparent elections. But people in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, in Havana, in Russia, in France, in Britain, the Congress, the people of this capital have the right to vote in their Congress. We do not yet, so that remains an ongoing struggle.
How do we change that?
Well, the continuous protests, but then the will of the Congress ultimately will determine. For a long time, they felt that they would not bring Hawaii in for fear of how Hawaiians may vote. And the people they elected voted opposite of the way they thought they would vote. But the point is, people of Hawaii were, in fact, had the status of in the preparations, the qualification to be a state, so we finally let them in. So they are 2 senators from Hawaii, but not from the District of Columbia. It's shameful.
You were a special presidential envoy for both the President and Secretary of State for the promotion of democracy in Africa. What is the state of democracy in Africa?
Africa is on the rise. You know, we had from Nkrumah in Ghana in 1957, Dr. King attended that ceremony and the Ralph Bunche attended it, Thurgood Marshall attended it. But from the inauguration of Nkrumah in 57 in Ghana down to Mandela in 1990, there were these struggles to end decolonization, to decolonize. There were these struggles to end forms of occupation and the like. And America, unfortunately, as the government, we were on the wrong side of every one of those revolutions. We chose British occupation and colonialism, or the French, or the Belgians, or the Portuguese, or the Africans over the indigenous population. We lost every battle as a government, but the freedom movement in our country, we were on the right side of history. So today, those countries are growing. 7 to 10 the fastest growing economies in the world in sub-Saharan Africa today, and that does not include Morocco. There's a free South Africa today. But those victories came from our freedom movement against the will of our government, which was locked into these undemocratic relationships. But that's what makes America great. At one level, in America, we have the right to fight for the right. And so we count it all for the good.
You received from President Clinton, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Tell me about that experience. But before you do, another time when you and I intersected in history, Princeton University used to be in charge, may still be, of the Woodrow Wilson Award. And 30 years ago, you were given that award in Washington, D.C., and I think even with a check, which is always appreciated. I got to represent the university and meet and talk with you then, and I think I was 24 years old or something like that.
It was a blessing that represents, in some sense of expression, thanks to our work. I've been blessed across these years. I went to jail first, July 16, 1960, trying to use a public library in Greenville, South Carolina. But July 16th,
which you were not allowed to use because of the color of your skin.
Arrested with 7 classmates trying to use a public library, called illiterate, but couldn't use the library. But July 16, 1984, 24 years to the day, I was speaking before the Democratic Convention in San Francisco, California, with Senator Hollins, who had been our senator at that time. It showed America's growth to that extent. And we were blessed during that serious season. During that season of work, we were able to do some things that have great meaning to us. I mean, I remember so well, we brought Lieutenant Robert Goodman back home from Syria. He was a pilot shot down. And President Reagan had said, don't go because you don't know what you're doing. And you might get him in more danger. But if you do get him, since we can't stop you from going, bring him to the White House. So we took the risk, we went. And we brought him back to the White House. And President Reagan received him. That was a high honor to be able to bring an American soldier back home. And the soldiers we brought back home really from Cuba and from Iraq and from Yugoslavia and Liberia and Gambia likewise were very kind of have moments of service. We were blessed to receive the Medal of Freedom under President Clinton. And the Tumble Award, the highest civilian award to non-American in South Africa. So with so many ups and downs, those moments I cherish very much.
The number of times you've gone to other countries, brought back Americans, yet there's clearly a lot to do in America. Well,
what does one do when one is illuminated in such a way? What does one do with light? Besides throw off some heat where there are cold places and illuminate the darkness. And so I try to position myself where my presence matters. Remember, we're here in Aspen today dealing with the issue of the environment, which many people see the environment in very abstract ways. But the carcinogens that come from fossil fuels are affecting the climate in such a way as driving tornadoes and hurricanes and floods. That's in melting glaciers. That's in real time. The lack of sensitivity to drinkable water is poisoning people to death. The underground bombs are shaking the foundations of our earth. Well, as a practical matter, we don't have time to deal with the environment. The fact is, if we were to reconstruct the home lost in foreclosure, it would create jobs. We could refortify those homes. We could use wind and solar and become less dependent upon fossils. Now we can make electric cars. We can now go 300 miles without on one charge. You can get across America as we move to it, becoming less dependent upon gas, for example. And so if we're going to use new energy, new green technology to put people back to work and be able to breathe free and have drinkable water and have jobs, everything about that is sound. So we use our presence to try to say, look, the environment really does matter. So one asked the question in the Bible, where will there be peace in the valley? See, when the lion and the lamb lie together. Well, that does not make sense, seemingly, because lions eat up lambs and lambs are afraid to negotiate with lions. But what do lions and lambs have that would make them agree on something? Neither lion nor lamb want acid rain on their back. Neither lion nor lamb want to drink water that's dirty and that will kill them. So if lions and lamb can find common ground, surely black and white, Jewish and Gentile can find common ground and coexist and not co-annihilate.
Do you think that when you look at different communities and people in poverty, is the environment an issue with them?
Well, it must become so. I mean, after all, 50 years ago, we were separated horizontally. I mean, blacks and whites couldn't sit together if at Alabama or LSU. Now in the big football game, it's not the complexion, it's direction. It's uniform color, not skin color. Black and white sit together, wearing red and white, one purple and gold, on a horizontal sit. But in terms of the disparities, fewer and fewer have more and more have less and less. And the middle class is caught between exporting jobs out, guns and drugs in, and homes foreclosed. So if the middle class lose their home, the bank foreclosure, and lose their jobs to capital, will be globalized capital, and don't globalize human rights, workers' rights, women and children's rights in the environment, then what was middle class becomes poor. And what became poor becomes more poor. And that gap between the few who have so much and the many who have so little is a dangerous gap for our democracy. We must figure out some creative way to democratize our economy and not just democratize the right to vote.
Even though the U.S. economy has come back and a lot of family wealth overall has been regained, the reality is the disparity between those at the bottom and those at the top is now greater today than it's been. How do we address that?
It's not come back. It made me think about in the days of Jesus, you know, if Rome was bursting at the seams with growth, if Herod, and the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, if they were doing well, if Jesus and those in Galilee and Nazareth were not doing well, you couldn't say things are going well. So he said, you measure character by how you treat the least of these, not just the middle class or the upper class. All of us matter. All of us as human beings are holy. And our nation is so blessed, and yet 50 million Americans are in poverty. That means that they don't have adequate meals. It means if you're on welfare, you can't own a car. You may not have access to public transportation. It means you have a low tax base. It means your children have inferior schools, less access to go to college. They don't have a banking account. And since they don't have a banking account, they're driven to the extreme of payday lending and other forms of high cost of money schemes.
Which makes things worse.
And so we are better off. Put it this way, we didn't know how good baseball could be until everybody could play.
All right, we'll be right back.
Coming up next.
All of America's people matter. Where do our great patriotic soldiers come from, so often from the poorest Americans? Where do our great athletes and singers and dancers, and where do the LeBron James of life come from? Where do the Beyoncés of life come from? They come from the people who God has given talents, and what makes America great is the ability to make sure those talents can be cultivated.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbertv.com.
I'm Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland.
Hi, I'm Jim Cameron, Director of Avatar.
I'm Christina Johnson, former Undersecretary of Energy.
Hi, I'm Oliver Stone.
Hi, I'm Mike Peters. I'm the creator of Mother Goose and Grimm.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
I would encourage you to watch the Aaron Harber Show. It's good fun.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show because he's a really cool guy.
Please watch the Aaron Harber Show, on which I do appear.
I want you to watch the Aaron Harber Show. Grimmy watches it every day.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. For information about the program, who our upcoming guests and topics are, and ways you can participate, please go to our website. That's harbertv.com. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. We depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's and world's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to allow us to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, please go to dmefd.org. Thanks for watching the show and for your support.
To obtain a DVD copy of this program, please contact info@harbertv.com.
We're back with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. So let's talk about solutions. How do we make a better America?
You target the areas of need, and don't assume people need something because they've not done something right. Don't assume people who have the most, the brightest, the most hard working, the most determined, those who have least are the least working, least concerned, least committed. It's simply not true. Some inherit, others cannot even earn. So step one is the constitutional right to vote for all Americans. We should end the madness of voter manipulation, whether in Florida in 2000, the winner lost, Al Gore, and the loser won, George Bush, because voter manipulation, state right now voting is a state's right. It should be, if free speech is a constitutional right, the right to vote should be a constitutional, not a state's right. It kind of starts right there. The second piece is that coming out of the Depression, Mr. Roosevelt had to target the poor, the plan to lift them up, and had to target to stop the force of greed by banks. He had to target a renewed sense of balance and bring in Social Security and make life more palatable for more of America's people. After all, when at wartime, who's going to war? The poorest, the most determined, the most committed, the most patriotic. The second thing is in Europe after World War II, they had been decimated by the war. We put together something called the Marshall Plan, meaning 50-year loans, 2% government security, and we bail them out. They were called development banks. Within the American zones, whether it's in Appalachia, where Lyndon Johnson opened up the war on poverty, America gets too little credit for what he did. Lyndon Johnson, second only to Lincoln as a great president. He opened up in Appalachia, University of Harvard, Athens, and then Native American reservations, and then the ghetto, the barrio, based upon need. And when you begin, and a coal miner dies every 6 hours of black lung disease. More poor people in America are not in ghettos, they're in Appalachia. But all of us must be under one big tent, and the leader of America must see America through a door, not to a keyhole, and all of us must fit. And so if you were bleeding on the day, the finger that's bleeding is the one that would get the attention. You wouldn't say you're bleeding because you shouldn't have stuck your finger in that door. It's your hand, it's your finger. Well, all of America's people matter? Where do our great patriotic soldiers come from, so often from the poorest Americans? Where do our great athletes and singers and dancers, and where do the LeBron James of life come from? Where do the Beyoncés of life come from? They come from the people who God has given talents, and they must, what makes America great is the ability to make sure those talents can be cultivated.
So in terms of social justice, what does America need to do?
President Barack Obama came into office, we lost 4 million jobs, losing about 800,000 a month. We've now gone into the plus zone. He's got us from minus to plus against violent and ugly odds. You're not an American, they say. You're not a Christian. You were not born here. Against the foolishness and madness of that, we are on the plus side of job creation. That's one step. That more Americans now are covered, have more health care coverage. And those who are protesting against more health coverage have it themselves. The other industry had collapsed. It's now number one again. And that's in the right direction. We were engaged in a war in Vietnam, in Iraq. We lost $2 trillion, 100,000 Iraqis killed, 6,000 Americans killed. A misadventure, and we hit the wrong target. And so trying to move that monstrous state of errors into a right direction is what he has done. Now, of course, we are still caught on the tail end of more expensive war misadventures and more tax cuts for the very wealthy. If we can bail out the banks, maybe we had to bail them out, but it was not linked to lending, not the reinvestment. So now banks have surplus money, and the regulations have been raised, they can't lend the money that they have. And they have because they got bailed out. We have maybe $2.5 trillion in money offshore that can't come back into the country because of the tax formula we've not worked out. So we have the resources. We must fairly commit to redistribute those resources in such a way so as to make all Americans enjoy the blessings of our country and our world.
Why is it to the advantage of those at the top to make sure those at the bottom are successful?
Because healthy bodies cost less than sick bodies. Developed minds are more productive than undeveloped minds. When I think about the New South, the one I grew up in, where we had to go to the movie on the weekend in the back door and sit up in the back of the theater, and the rest are trying to go to the library and the like. Now from Virginia around to Texas, you have a New South. You couldn't have had the Dallas Cowboys and the Miami Dolphins behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had the Charlotte Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had the Olympics in Atlanta behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had the Super Bowl in New Orleans or Miami behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had all of this growth of technology and international investment, auto industry, athletic industry, high tech, because the walls came down. And when walls come down and bridges are built, we all get better. If we planted 2 seeds of equal strength right now into the ground, and we watered both of them, we put a wall up. One will grow taller with multiples of fruit. One will be stunted. The one that's tall is not a better, and the one that's stunted is not a less. It's that the wall blocks the sunshine. The one that gets photosynthesis blossoms. The one in the shade is stunted. When the wall comes down, we all can grow and share and make great contributions. And that's the American dream. Why do we get along so well on the athletic field? You know, you pull the Denver, team, or the Houston team, or Miami, or the Bulls, and you pull the uniform color, not skin color. What makes for these fanatical passions about these teams, and yet it transcends race and where you went to school and all of that? Because whenever the playing field is even, this is the key. These are the keys. Whenever the playing field is even, and the rules are public, and the goals are clear, and the referees are fair, and the scores are transparent, we all get along. That sense of inherent justice on that athletic field was proven to access to medical care and science and technology and engineering and mathematics.
Reverend, thank you so much.
Thank you again, sir.
A pleasure to have you on the show. That was the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.